Chapter 3, Canine Conspiracies. Eleanor stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a certain tightness had taken residence around her mouth, the unmistakable mark of prolonged stress. She'd overslept for the first time in years, the alarm silenced in her sleep-deprived state. Now she was rushing, her carefully constructed morning routine in shambles. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Another email from Williams & Reed, requesting additional writing samples. Not a rejection, but not the offer she'd hoped would follow yesterday's second interview. She tucked the phone into her pocket without responding. Later. She'd deal with it later.
Peanut, we're late.
The dachshund trotted into the bathroom, his expression distinctly unconcerned about their deviation from schedule. Eleanor clipped on his leash with more force than necessary, earning a reproachful look from her small companion.
Don't give me that face. Some of us care about punctuality.
Outside, the morning had already shifted from dawn's muted palette to the full brightness of day. The city moved at its usual relentless pace, people streaming toward offices, delivery trucks double-parked on narrow streets, cyclists weaving through traffic with reckless determination. Eleanor jogged rather than walked, pulling Peanut along in a half-trot that the dachshund clearly resented. By the time they reached Madison Street Dog Park, Eleanor's carefully styled ponytail had partially collapsed, wisps of hair framing her face in a way that suggested dishevelment, rather than the professional polish she preferred. She pushed through the gate, unclipping Peanut's leash with an automatic motion. The park was quieter than usual for this time of morning. Most of the early regulars had already come and gone, leaving only a few stragglers. No sign of Maggie, no sign of...
I was beginning to think you weren't coming today.
Eleanor turned to find Leo leaning against the fence, Apollo sitting patiently at his feet. Today's sweater was a faded burgundy, the leather patches at the elbows worn smooth with age. His hair was its usual artful mess, but there was something different about his expression. A slight tightness around the eyes that suggested he, too, might be carrying concerns he was attempting to conceal.
Overslept. First time in... I don't even remember.
A historic occasion, then.
She found herself smiling despite her frazzled state.
Hardly worth commemorating.
I disagree. Life's small rebellions deserve recognition, even the unconscious ones.
Peanut had already made his way to Apollo, the two dogs greeting each other with the comfortable familiarity of established friends. The husky lowered his head to the dachshund's level, their noses touching briefly before they began a synchronized circuit of the park's perimeter.
They're quite the pair, aren't they?
Apollo's selective about his friends. He must see something in Peanut that resonates.
Eleanor watched the dogs, struck by how at ease they seemed together despite their comical size difference. Apollo's graceful lope slowed to accommodate Peanut's determined waddle, neither seeming to find the adjustment strange or burdensome.
How's the bookstore?
Something flickered across Leo's face, a brief shadow quickly suppressed.
Standing its ground, for now.
That sounds ominous.
Just the usual small business challenges. Nothing worth discussing on such a fine morning.
He gestured toward the sky where the clouds had parted to reveal a perfect cerulean expanse.
What about you? Any news on the job front?
Still waiting. Second interview yesterday, but...
She trailed off, unwilling to voice the growing fear that had taken root in her mind. That perhaps her career had peaked at 28. That the upward trajectory she'd taken for granted might have been permanently altered.
But it's hard to exist in that liminal space between what was and what will be.
The precision of his observation startled her. Most people offered platitudes, you'll find something soon or their loss, rather than acknowledging the difficult reality of transition.
Exactly.
A companionable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the occasional bark from one of the park's canine occupants. Eleanor found the quiet unexpectedly comfortable, devoid of the pressure to fill it with professional accomplishments or careful deflections. The sound of a yelp, followed by frantic barking, shattered the moment. Eleanor and Leo turned simultaneously toward the noise. Across the park, Peanut had suddenly frozen, his body rigid with attention as he stared at something near the fence line. A small gray field mouse, perhaps even the same one from earlier, was scurrying along the perimeter.
Oh, looks like our friend Dorothy has relatives.
Dorothy?
The mouse from the bookstore. Apollo and I named her.
Before Eleanor could respond, Peanut launched into action, charging toward the mouse with single-minded determination. The small rodent, sensing danger, squeezed through a gap beneath the fence. Without hesitation, Peanut flattened his body and somehow worked his way under the same narrow opening, his stubborn persistence allowing him to squeeze through what seemed an impossible space.
Peanut, no!
Now on the sidewalk, the dachshund resumed his chase, his prey darting toward the busy intersection ahead. Apollo remained on the park side, circling anxiously, barking through the fence, unable to follow through the narrow gap despite his desperate attempts.
Peanut, no!
She broke into a run, Leo close behind. By the time they reached the fence, Peanut had already trotted halfway down the block, his tail held high like a triumphant flag.
How did he... That gap is tiny.
Dachshunds are escape artists. Something about their body shape.
Less analysis, more catching, please.
They raced toward the gate, but Peanut, seeing their approach, apparently decided this was an excellent game and picked up his pace, stubby legs carrying him with surprising speed toward the busy intersection ahead.
Oh God, he's heading for Monroe Street.
Leo was already moving, cutting diagonally across the park toward the opposite gate, which would put him ahead of the escaping dachshund. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding with a fear disproportionate to the situation. Intellectually, she knew Peanut was likely in no real danger, but emotionally. They burst through the gate just as Peanut reached the corner. Eleanor opened her mouth to call him again, but before she could, Leo dropped into a crouch, pulling something from his pocket.
Peanut, treat time!
The dachshund skidded to a halt, nose twitching as he processed this new information. His head swiveled from the interesting smells of the intersection to the guaranteed reward in Leo's hand. After a moment of canine calculation, he trotted back toward them, dignity intact, as if this had been his plan all along.
That's it. Good choice.
Leo remained perfectly still as Peanut approached, the small dog's body language shifting from confident explorer to eager recipient. When Peanut was within reach, Leo smoothly slipped a finger through his collar while simultaneously delivering the promised treat.
Gotcha.
Eleanor, who had been holding her breath without realizing it, exhaled sharply.
That was... Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if he'd...
No need to go down that rabbit hole. He's fine. You're fine. Crisis averted.
He handed Peanut's collar to Eleanor, who promptly attached the leash she'd been clutching in a white-knuckled grip. The dachshund looked between them, apparently confused about why his adventure had been cut short.
You're grounded. Forever.
Harsh but fair.
A smile tugged at Eleanor's mouth despite her lingering adrenaline. She glanced back toward the dog park, where Apollo waited patiently at the fence, blue eyes tracking their movements.
Your dog, on the other hand, is remarkably well-behaved.
Don't let appearances fool you. Apollo has his own escape artist tendencies. He just employs different methods.
Such as?
Last month he figured out how to open the back door of the shop. I found him 3 blocks away, charming free pastries from the bakery staff.
The image of the dignified husky negotiating for baked goods pulled a genuine laugh from Eleanor, the sound surprising her with its unfamiliarity. How long had it been since she'd really laughed? Behind them, a car horn blared, making them both jump. Eleanor suddenly became aware of how they must look. 2 adults crouched on a busy sidewalk, having an intense conversation while holding a supremely unconcerned dachshund between them.
I should probably get him home. Clearly, the dog park is a bust today.
I was actually about to head back to the store. Apollo needs to assume his official mascot duties.
He hesitated, a flash of uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing his features.
It's only 6 blocks from here. You and Peanut are welcome to walk with us if you want. No pressure.
Eleanor should have declined. Her day was already off schedule, her to-do list waiting, emails to send, applications to complete. Yet something, perhaps the remnants of adrenaline, perhaps the genuine warmth in Leo's invitation, made her nod.
That would be nice, actually.
They walked back to retrieve Apollo, who greeted their return with a dignified woof. As they exited the park together, Eleanor felt a strange lightness, as if she'd stepped sideways from her carefully plotted course into something undefined but not entirely unwelcome. They headed east along Monroe Street, the sun warming their shoulders as they walked. Peanut strutted proudly between them, occasionally glancing up as if to ensure his humans were following his lead. Apollo padded alongside Leo, his blue eyes alert to every movement on the street.
So that building there
Leo pointed to an imposing stone structure on the corner.
was the First National Bank until 1962. Look at those zigzags around the doorway.
Eleanor paused, following his gesture. The entryway was framed by a series of geometric patterns she'd never noticed before, despite having walked past this building dozens of times.
They're beautiful. I've never really looked at them.
Classic Art Deco. The whole building was designed by Harriet Windsor Smith in 1928, one of the few female architects working during that period.
His voice held a quiet enthusiasm that softened his features.
She snuck her initials into the ironwork. Right there, see?
He stepped closer to the building, his shoulder brushing against Eleanor's as he pointed to a delicate HWS woven into the decorative metalwork. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth up Eleanor's arm.
How do you know all this?
Books, mostly. And talking to people who've been here longer than I have.
He smiled, a hint of self-consciousness crossing his features.
I might have also cornered the city's historical preservation officer at a community meeting once.
Once?
Possibly 3 times, but who's counting?
They continued walking, Peanut trotting ahead with newfound purpose. At the next block, Leo slowed, gesturing toward a faded brick wall.
If you look closely.
Eleanor squinted up at what appeared to be nothing more than weathered brick. Then, as her eyes adjusted, faint lettering emerged from the surface. Hartman's department store, quality goods for the discerning family. The ghost of advertisements passed.
I would have walked right by that.
Most people do. That's the beauty of cities. They're layered with stories most of us never notice.
Is that why you left finance? To notice things?
The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Leo's stride faltered for just a moment, something complicated flickering across his expression.
Partly. In finance, I spent all day looking at spreadsheets, projections, market trends, numbers representing money that itself represented some theoretical value.
He glanced up at the faded sign.
I miss tangible things, history you could touch.
They turned onto Maple Street, where the buildings were shorter, more human-scaled. Apollo suddenly darted forward, leading them toward an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk in front of a small flower shop, bursting with colorful blooms arranged in tiered displays.
Well, if it isn't the troublemaker and his human.
Morning, Marcus. Apollo insisted on saying hello.
The older man bent down, his face creasing with pleasure as Apollo pressed his head into the man's hand. He looked up, noticing Eleanor and Peanut.
And who do we have here?
This is Eleanor Washington and Peanut. Eleanor, meet Marcus Chen, best florist in the city and keeper of more neighborhood secrets than the local bartenders.
Marcus laughed, the sound warm and rich. He extended a hand to Eleanor, his grip firm despite his age.
Any friend of Leo's is welcome here, especially one with such a distinguished-looking companion.
He nodded toward Peanut, who had assumed a posture of remarkable dignity, as if aware he was being complimented.
It's nice to meet you. We actually just ran into each other at the dog park.
Ah, the dog park. Nature's matchmaker.
Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could correct the misunderstanding, Leo stepped in.
Eleanor's walking with us to the shop. Peanut showed impressive mouse hunting potential. Thought Apollo might appreciate the professional assistance.
That mouse still giving you trouble? Told you to get a cat.
A cat would disturb the books. Besides, Apollo would never forgive me.
As if on cue, the husky looked up at Leo with an expression of such profound agreement that Eleanor couldn't suppress a smile.
Well, don't let me keep you. Good to meet you, Eleanor. Stop by any time. First bouquets on the house.
They continued down the street, passing a small bakery where the scent of fresh bread wafted through open doors. An older woman looked up from arranging pastries in the window, waving cheerfully when she spotted Leo.
That's Diane, third-generation baker. Her sourdough starter is allegedly older than both of us combined.
You really do know everyone.
Not a difficult feat in a neighborhood this size. Besides,
He gestured toward Apollo.
I have an excellent social secretary.
They turned onto a side street lined with mature oak trees, their branches creating a dappled canopy overhead. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the sidewalk beneath their feet. Eleanor found herself slowing, not from exhaustion but from a reluctance to end this unexpected detour in her carefully plotted day.
These buildings are beautiful.
Most of them survived the urban renewal craze of the 60s. This block was almost demolished for a parking structure.
What stopped it?
Community activism. People who understood that a neighborhood is more than just real estate.
Something in his tone made Eleanor glance at him. A tightness had returned to his features, a shadow passing behind his eyes.
Sorry, pet topic.
No, I get it. Some things are worth protecting.
As they walked, Eleanor noticed a worn stone step leading to what appeared to be a boutique selling handmade jewelry. The center of the step was noticeably deeper than the edges, worn down by countless footsteps.
That step has seen better days.
Actually, I'd argue it's seen the exact right number of days.
He paused beside it, gesturing for her to look more closely.
See how the middle is worn down? Thousands of people stepping in almost exactly the same spot for over 100 years. There's something beautiful about that, don't you think? The physical accumulation of human presence.
Eleanor studied the step, then looked up at the building behind it. What had once seemed like just another storefront suddenly became something more, a place where countless people had entered and exited, each footstep imperceptibly wearing away at the stone until, over decades, their collective presence had literally reshaped the physical world.
I've never thought about it that way.
Most people don't. We're conditioned to see wear as degradation rather than character.
He caught her eye, something warm in his gaze.
Perfection is overrated. I prefer things with a few scars, a history you can see.
Eleanor found herself seeing the familiar streets with new eyes, noticing details that had always existed just beyond her awareness. The urban landscape transformed from mere backdrop into a text that could be read, if one knew how to look, and walking beside someone who clearly did. They turned onto a tree-lined side street, where the buildings were shorter, more human-scaled than the gleaming towers downtown. Cornerstone Books occupied the ground floor of a handsome brick building with large windows and a deep green awning. The simple gold lettering on the glass stated only Cornerstone, and beneath it, in smaller text, Established 2020.
This is you?
This is us.
He glanced down at Apollo, who had perked up at the sight of the familiar storefront.
Home away from home.
He unlocked the door, holding it open for Eleanor and Peanut. The gentle chime of a bell announced their entry. Eleanor stepped inside and immediately felt as though she'd entered another world. The high ceilings, the warm wooden shelves, the comfortable reading nooks tucked into corners, all created an atmosphere of welcoming tranquility. The scent was intoxicating, leather and paper and the faint sweetness of old glue. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden shafts. Apollo trotted directly to a large, cushioned bed positioned near the register, settling into it with the air of a monarch reclaiming his throne.
Make yourselves comfortable. I just need to check the overnight orders.
As Leo disappeared into a back room, Eleanor wandered through the shop, Peanut investigating at her feet. The organization wasn't immediately obvious until she began to notice the small, handwritten cards affixed to each section. Instead of standard bookstore categories, Leo had arranged his inventory by more evocative themes. For rainy Sundays, when you need to escape books that changed the world, whether the world noticed or not. Sentences so beautiful, you'll want to read them aloud. She found herself smiling at these unconventional groupings, each revealing something about the mind that had created them. Peanut, meanwhile, had discovered Apollo's water bowl and was helping himself without invitation.
Peanut, that's not yours.
Apollo's very generous with his resources.
Leo had returned, carrying a steaming mug that he placed on the counter. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air.
Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? Water for the distinguished gentleman with the short legs?
I should probably get going. I've already derailed my entire morning schedule.
The tyranny of the schedule.
He leaned against the counter, an amused glint in his eyes.
What's next on the agenda? Color-coding your sock drawer? Alphabetizing your spice rack?
Eleanor felt a flash of irritation that quickly dissolved at the gentle teasing in his tone.
Applications, networking, the thrilling pursuit of employment.
Sounds exhausting.
It is.
The admission slipped out before she could apply her usual filter.
Every day feels like I'm trying to sell a slightly different version of myself, depending on who's potentially buying.
The metaphor landed more bleakly than she'd intended. Leo studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful.
Stay for 1 cup of coffee. The job search will still be there in 20 minutes.
She should have declined. That would have been the responsible choice. But the thought of returning to her silent apartment, to the endless cycle of applications and rejections, made her hesitate just long enough for Peanut to settle himself comfortably beside Apollo's bed, clearly voting in favor of extending their visit.
1 cup.
Excellent. How do you take it?
Black is fine.
A minimalist. I should have guessed.
He disappeared again, returning moments later with a second mug that he handed to her with a small flourish. The ceramic was pleasantly warm against her palms, the coffee inside dark and fragrant.
Italian roast. Not too acidic, hint of chocolate undertones.
Eleanor took a sip and had to suppress a small sound of appreciation. It was possibly the best coffee she'd ever tasted, miles from the utilitarian brew she made at home.
Good?
Yes, very good.
He smiled, a flash of genuine pleasure at her approval.
Small pleasures matter. Maybe especially when the big picture is uncertain.
They settled into a pair of armchairs near the front window, the dogs dozing contentedly at their feet. Through the glass, Eleanor could see the neighborhood coming fully to life. People hurrying to work, a mail carrier making her rounds, a young couple walking hand in hand with the unhurried gait of those with nowhere particular to be.
How did you end up here? Owning a bookstore, I mean.
Leo cradled his mug, something careful entering his expression.
The short version is that I needed a change. My previous career was consuming, financially rewarding, but ultimately unsatisfying.
What did you do before?
Finance, investment strategy, very boring stuff.
There was something practiced about his dismissal, as if he'd delivered this abbreviated version of his history many times before.
And now you sell books classified by mood rather than subject.
A vast improvement, wouldn't you say?
Before she could respond, Peanut suddenly sat up, attention fixed on something beyond their view. A low growl rumbled from his small body.
Peanut? What's...
The dachshund launched himself from his resting place, racing toward a shelf at the back of the store with surprising speed. Apollo, startled awake by the movement, watched with evident curiosity but made no move to follow.
I think your dog just spotted our resident mouse.
Your bookstore has mice?
Mouse, singular. Dorothy's been living in the walls for at least a year. Very literary rodent, partial to the classics section.
Eleanor placed her mug on a side table and stood, moving toward the sound of determined scratching. She rounded the corner of a tall bookshelf to find Peanut with his front paws on the lowest shelf, nose pressed to the baseboard, emitting a series of excited whines.
Peanut, leave it.
The dachshund ignored her completely, now attempting to squeeze his front half into a gap between the shelf and the wall. Eleanor bent to grab his back legs, just as something small and gray darted across the floor. Peanut lunged, Eleanor lost her grip, and suddenly books were tumbling from the shelf as the dachshund crashed into it with the full force of his surprisingly solid body.
Peanut!
She made another grab for him, missed, and found herself off balance. She stumbled backward, colliding with something, no, someone, as a pair of hands steadied her by the shoulders. Leo. She'd backed directly into him, and now they were standing impossibly close, his hands still gentle on her arms, her back nearly against his chest.
Are you okay?
His voice was close to her ear, his breath warm against her neck. Eleanor felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her stomach, a momentary short circuit in her usual cognitive processes.
Fine, I'm fine. Peanut, on the other hand.
She stepped forward, breaking contact, suddenly hyper-aware of the heat rising to her cheeks. Peanut had emerged from behind the bookcase, looking enormously pleased with himself despite his clear failure to catch the mouse.
Dorothy lives another day.
I am so sorry about the books.
She knelt to gather the fallen volumes, mortification replacing whatever fluttery feeling had momentarily possessed her. Leo crouched beside her, their hands briefly touching as they reached for the same book.
No harm done. Most books improve with a little adventure.
Most clients prefer their legal counsel not to destroy private property within minutes of meeting.
Is that your professional assessment counselor?
There was something in his tone, a gentle teasing that invited rather than mocked. Eleanor found herself smiling despite her embarrassment.
It is. Along with my recommendation that you bill us accordingly for any damages.
I'll accept payment in the form of bringing that troublemaker back for a visit.
He nodded toward Peanut, who had the grace to look at least somewhat abashed.
Apollo could use the company during the day, and your schedule must leave Peanut alone quite a bit when you're interviewing.
Eleanor paused in reshelving a book, surprised by the offer.
You want Peanut to spend time here? After he just tried to dismantle your store?
He was just performing his historical function. Hunting vermin is what dachshunds were bred for, after all.
Still?
Really, it's no trouble. Apollo gets bored being the only four-legged employee. Customers love having dogs around. It's good for business.
Eleanor studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity or mere politeness. She found none. Only a genuine openness that was becoming increasingly familiar.
I do have another interview tomorrow afternoon.
She hesitated, mentally calculating the logistics.
But I couldn't ask you to...
You're not asking. I'm offering. Big difference.
Eleanor glanced down at Peanut, who had settled at her feet, apparently exhausted from his hunting exertions. The truth was, she had been worried about leaving him alone for extended periods. The doggy daycare she'd used occasionally was expensive, an expense she couldn't justify indefinitely in her current situation.
If you're sure it wouldn't be a burden.
Quite the opposite. Literary establishments have a long tradition of shop pets. We're simply doubling our credentials.
They finished reshelving the books, working in a companionable rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. When the last volume was in place, Eleanor checked her watch, startled to see that nearly 45 minutes had passed since they'd entered the shop.
I really should go. Thank you for the coffee, and the rescue, and the mouse hunt entertainment.
All standard services at Cornerstone. Though the mouse hunt is usually an amateurish solo performance by Apollo.
They moved toward the front of the store, Peanut trailing sleepily behind. At the door, Eleanor paused, suddenly awkward.
So, tomorrow? For Peanut's first day of work?
Let's call it an unpaid internship to start. See if he has what it takes.
A laugh escaped her, genuine and unguarded.
He definitely doesn't, but I appreciate the opportunity.
I've always had a soft spot for the underqualified but enthusiastic.
Something about the way he said it, with warmth rather than condescension, made Eleanor wonder if he was still talking about Peanut. Before she could overthink it, she extended her hand.
Thank you, Leo, really.
He took her offered hand, his grasp warm and solid. What should have been a brief, professional handshake lingered a beat too long, neither quite willing to be the first to let go.
Until tomorrow, then.
Outside, the morning had fully bloomed into day, the streets now bustling with the energy of a city in constant motion. As Eleanor walked home, Peanut trotting contentedly at her side, she found her mind returning to the moment in the bookstore, the unexpected closeness, the steadying hands on her shoulders, the brief touch as they reached for the same fallen book. Trivial moments, inconsequential, certainly not worth the disproportionate space they were occupying in her thoughts. Yet as she reached her apartment building, Eleanor realized that for the first time in 28 days, she had spent an entire hour without thinking about her job search, without mentally rehearsing interview answers or crafting the perfect follow-up email, without the constant, gnawing anxiety that had become her unwelcome companion. 1 hour of simply being present in a bookstore with creaky floors and a resident mouse, with a man whose eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and who classified books by how they made you feel, rather than by conventional categories.
It doesn't mean anything,
She informed Peanut as they rode the elevator to her floor.
It's just a practical arrangement. He needs help with the mouse problem, and you need somewhere to be during my interview.
Peanut tilted his head, his expression suggesting he found this explanation unconvincing.
Don't give me that look. Not everyone has ulterior motives.
But as she unlocked her apartment door, Eleanor couldn't quite suppress the small smile that tugged at her lips, or the unfamiliar flutter that returned when she thought about returning to Cornerstone Books the following day. Peanut, for his part, trotted directly to his bed and settled in with a contented sigh, apparently already dreaming of mice and bookshop adventures to come. Chapter 4. Unpredictable Variables. Eleanor stood outside Cornerstone Books the following morning, shifting her weight from one foot to the other as Peanut gazed up at her with what could only be described as canine impatience. The dachshund's leash was looped around her wrist, his travel bag, containing food, treats, toys, and detailed written instructions, slung over her shoulder. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its contents, much like the anxiety pressing against her ribs.
This is ridiculous. It's dog-sitting, not a merger negotiation.
Peanut tilted his head, ears perked forward.
You,
She pointed a finger at the dog.
will be on your best behavior. No book destruction. No mouse hunting. No making me look like I've completely failed at basic pet ownership.
The dachshund blinked, unimpressed by her attempt at laying down the law.
And we're officially having conversations with a dog now. Perfect.
Taking a deep breath, Eleanor pushed open the door, setting off the gentle chime of the bell. The scent of books, coffee, and something faintly citrusy greeted her. Leo was behind the counter, sorting through a stack of mail, his brow furrowed in concentration. Apollo lay nearby, his blue eyes immediately locking onto the newcomers. The husky rose, stretching languidly before trotting over to greet them. Eleanor unclipped Peanut's leash, the dachshund immediately darting forward to touch noses with Apollo. The size discrepancy between the two dogs was almost comical, like a naval destroyer encountering a particularly confident tugboat.
Morning.
Leo looked up, a smile transforming his features. Today's sweater was forest green, with the same hole at the elbow she'd noticed yesterday.
Ready for Peanut's first day of gainful employment?
I think the question is whether your store is ready for Peanut.
She hefted the bag from her shoulder, placing it on the counter.
I've brought everything he might need. Food, water bowl, treats. Only for emergencies. Not because he's manipulated you with his eyes. And his favorite toy. I've also included written instructions about his schedule, preferences, and the command words he knows but chooses to ignore.
You created a user manual for your dog?
I like to be thorough.
Leo picked up the 3 pages of neatly typed instructions, eyebrows rising as he flipped through them.
Under no circumstances should Peanut be allowed to convince you he hasn't been fed. He will lie directly to your face.
He glanced at the dachshund, who was now sniffing with intense interest at the base of a bookshelf.
I didn't realize dachshunds were such accomplished con artists.
You have no idea. He once convinced my neighbor he was a neglected stray. She fed him an entire rotisserie chicken before realizing he had a collar with my phone number.
Leo laughed, the sound warm and genuine, crinkling the corners of his eyes in a way that made Eleanor momentarily lose her train of thought.
Well, don't worry. Apollo and I are wise to canine manipulation tactics, aren't we, bud?
Apollo, who had been watching the exchange with interest, flopped onto his side and gazed up at Leo with an expression of such tragic hunger that Eleanor couldn't suppress a smile.
Very convincing.
He's been starving since breakfast 2 hours ago.
Eleanor glanced at her watch. A habit so ingrained she often checked the time without conscious intent. Her interview wasn't for another 4 hours, but she'd planned to use the morning for final preparation. Still, something in her hesitated to leave.
I should probably...
Stay for coffee?
He gestured toward the back of the store.
I just brewed a fresh pot, and I could use a second opinion on which display to set up for next week's author event.
She should decline. The schedule she'd mapped out that morning had no room for impromptu coffee breaks. And yet,
I suppose I could stay for a few minutes to make sure Peanut settles in.
Leo's smile widened as he led her toward the small office behind the counter, where the promised coffee awaited. Eleanor found herself noticing things she'd missed yesterday. The careful organization of the space, the way books were arranged for maximum visual appeal, the small touches that made the store feel more like a well-loved living room than a retail space.
Black, right?
You remembered.
I'm surprisingly good with details for someone who can't find matching socks most mornings.
He handed her a steaming mug, ceramic, not paper, with "All books are true," especially the fictional ones printed across its side.
Nice mug.
One of our best-selling items, actually. People come in for books and leave with mugs, tote bags, and bookmarks they didn't know they needed.
Effective upselling.
I prefer to think of it as literary adjacent enthusiasm encouragement.
Eleanor took a sip of the coffee, the rich flavor causing her to close her eyes briefly in appreciation.
This is seriously good coffee.
Small pleasures matter, especially in the morning.
He leaned against the counter, studying her with a thoughtfulness that made her inexplicably self-conscious.
You seem tense. Big interview today?
That obvious?
Your shoulders are approximately at ear level.
She consciously relaxed them, realizing he was right.
Williams and Reed. Second interview.
Impressive. They've got that whole corner office in the glass tower thing going on, don't they?
42nd floor, yes.
With the requisite soul-crushing billable hours, I imagine.
It's a good firm. Solid reputation, excellent client base.
And that's what matters to you?
The question caught her off guard, not because it was invasive, but because no one had asked her that in a very long time. Everyone in her professional circle accepted without question that certain firms, certain positions, certain career trajectories were inherently desirable. No one asked why anymore.
Stability matters, especially now.
She hadn't meant to reveal even that much, but something about Leo's direct gaze made evasion feel more exhausting than honesty.
Fair enough.
He didn't press further, instead gesturing toward the dogs, who had settled near the front window. Apollo's larger body curled protectively around Peanut's smaller one as morning sunlight bathed them both in gold.
Looks like Peanut's settling in just fine.
Eleanor checked her watch again. She really should go.
Before you leave, I wanted to show you something.
He led her to a section near the back of the store, where a small table displayed a carefully arranged selection of books beneath a sign reading, "For when life zigs when you planned to zag."
Thought you might find something useful here. Professional reinvention is something of a special interest of mine.
Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines, noting titles that ranged from practical career advice to philosophical explorations of purpose and meaning. One book in particular caught her eye, The Gift of Uncertainty by Eliza Montgomery.
That one's excellent.
He gently pulled it from the display, handing it to her.
Montgomery was a corporate attorney who lost everything in the 2008 crash. Found herself having to completely rebuild at 45.
And now she writes self-help books?
Eleanor couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice.
Actually, she runs a non-profit legal clinic for housing discrimination cases. The book was a side project.
He took the book back, flipping it open to a dog-eared page.
The illusion of control is the greatest casualty of unexpected change, and yet it's only by surrendering that illusion that we discover what we're truly capable of building.
Eleanor frowned, something uncomfortable stirring beneath her carefully maintained composure.
Sounds like giving up.
Or like letting go of the map when it no longer matches the territory.
A sudden crash from the front of the store shattered the moment. They both turned to see a tower of books now scattered across the floor, Peanut standing amid the literary carnage with an expression that somehow combined guilt and defiance. Apollo sat a few feet away, his posture suggesting he was trying very hard to communicate that he had absolutely nothing to do with this situation.
Peanut.
I think we just witnessed the first act of workplace rebellion.
Eleanor hurried toward the mess, mortification heating her cheeks as she began gathering the fallen books.
I am so sorry. This was a terrible idea. I should never have...
Hey.
Leo crouched beside her, his hands joining hers in collecting the scattered volumes.
It's fine, really. This place has survived far worse.
But your display...
Was clearly not dachshund-proof. Design flaw on my part.
His casual dismissal of what she saw as Peanut's inexcusable behavior bewildered her.
You're not angry?
About some toppled books? That would be a serious waste of emotional energy.
He stacked the last few volumes, then scratched Peanut behind the ears.
Besides, I'm pretty sure he was making an artistic statement about the arbitrary nature of literary categorization.
A surprised laugh escaped her, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly.
You're very flexible.
You say that like it's a character flaw.
Not a flaw, just different.
From?
From most people I know. Everything in my world has always been about precision, preparation, control. Making the right impression. Taking the right steps. Following the plan.
And how's that working out for you lately?
The question should have felt like a jab, but something in his tone, genuine curiosity rather than judgment, softened its impact.
Point taken.
She glanced at her watch yet again, knowing she'd already stayed longer than she should have.
I really do need to go. The interview.
Say no more. Go conquer the 42nd floor.
Eleanor gave Peanut a final pat, surprised by the small twinge she felt at leaving him.
I'll be back around 4. Sooner if they hate me and cut the interview short.
They won't hate you.
You can't possibly know that.
I have excellent intuition about these things.
His confidence, baseless as it was, somehow made her feel marginally better as she gathered her things to leave. At the door, she turned back.
Thank you for this. For watching him, for the coffee, for
my unsolicited philosophical musings?
I was going to say for being nice about the books, but yes, those too.
His smile was the last thing she saw as she stepped out into the morning sunshine, the bell chiming cheerfully behind her. The Williams and Reed offices occupied 3 floors of the Patterson Tower, a gleaming monolith of glass and steel that dominated the downtown skyline. Eleanor sat in the 42nd floor reception area, hands folded in her lap, back straight, the picture of professional composure. If the receptionist noticed that she'd arrived 27 minutes early, she gave no indication. Eleanor used the time to mentally review her preparation. Case studies memorized, firm history researched, partners' backgrounds analyzed for potential conversation points, answers to likely questions rehearsed to the point of muscle memory. She was ready. So why did her mind keep drifting back to Cornerstone Books, to a man in a shabby sweater who quoted career change philosophy and remained unfazed by small calamities?
Ms. Washington, they're ready for you.
The receptionist's voice pulled Eleanor back to the present. She stood, straightening her already immaculate suit jacket.
Thank you.
She followed the woman down a corridor lined with landscape photographs in austere black frames. Each conference room they passed revealed similar scenes: people in expensive suits, surrounded by stacks of documents, expressions of intense concentration on their faces. The familiar environment should have comforted her. Instead, she found herself noticing how the overhead lighting cast everyone in the same unflattering pallor. The interview passed in a blur of handshakes, carefully considered answers, and the practiced dance of professional assessment. Eleanor performed flawlessly, drawing on years of experience presenting arguments to far more intimidating audiences than 3 mid-level partners at a second-tier firm.
Your litigation experience at Hargrove was quite impressive,
said Richard Tanner, the most senior of the 3 interviewers.
but I'm curious why you're interested in our corporate division rather than continuing in that specialty.
The question was a trap, of course. Expressed too much enthusiasm for corporate law, and they'd wonder why she hadn't specialized in it sooner. Suggest any dissatisfaction with litigation, and they'd question her judgment. Eleanor navigated it with practiced ease.
While I found litigation intellectually stimulating, I've always been drawn to the constructive nature of corporate practice. Building structures that facilitate business rather than stepping in when those structures break down. At Hargrove, I was fortunate to work on several cases that intersected with corporate issues, which only confirmed my interest in that area.
All true, yet somehow hollow in her own ears. When had she started speaking in these carefully constructed paragraphs, every word selected for maximum impact with minimum risk?
Well, I think we have everything we need.
He closed the folder containing her resume, the gesture carrying the finality of a judge's gavel.
We'll be making our decision by the end of next week. Jennifer will show you out.
Handshakes, polite smiles. The same corridor, this time walked in reverse. Eleanor maintained her professional demeanor until the elevator doors closed behind her, finally allowing her shoulders to drop as she descended 42 floors back to street level. Outside, the afternoon sun was sharper than it had been that morning, the shadows of the surrounding buildings cutting precise geometric patterns across the sidewalk. Eleanor checked her phone, 2:17 p.m. The interview had run shorter than expected, leaving her with unexpected free time before she needed to retrieve Peanut. The logical choice would be to return home, document the interview details while they were fresh, and begin preparing follow-up materials. That's what the Eleanor of 4 weeks ago would have done without question. Instead, she found herself turning away from the direction of her apartment and walking toward the older part of town where Cornerstone Books waited. Its faded green awning a stark contrast to the reflective surfaces of the business district. 6 blocks into her journey, Eleanor realized she was smiling. A small, private smile that had appeared without her conscious permission. She quickened her pace. The bell above the door announced her arrival at Cornerstone Books, but the scene that greeted her was not what she'd expected. The usually quiet store now hummed with activity. A small crowd had gathered near the center, where Leo stood surrounded by what appeared to be a children's reading group. Children of various ages sat cross-legged on a large circular rug. their attention fixed on Leo as he read aloud from a picture book, his voice shifting dramatically between characters.
"But how will we cross the river?" asked Little Bear. The turtle looked at the swirling water, then back at his frightened friend. "Sometimes," said the turtle, "the only way to know if you can do something is to try."
Leo looked up from the book, making eye contact with each child in turn.
"And do you know what happened next?"
They swam across.
No, they built a boat.
The turtle carried Little Bear on his shell.
"Let's find out."
As Leo turned the page, Eleanor noticed Peanut sitting at the edge of the group, his posture mimicking the attentive children. Apollo lay nearby, apparently serving as a backrest for a small girl who absently stroked his fur while listening to the story. Eleanor remained by the door, unwilling to interrupt. There was something mesmerizing about watching Leo with the children, the animated expressions that transformed his usually calm features, the genuine enthusiasm in his voice, the way he paused to show each illustration as if revealing a precious treasure. A woman approached her, coffee mug in hand. From her business casual attire and the visitor badge clipped to her lanyard, Eleanor guessed she was a teacher or group leader.
First time at story hour?
I just came to pick up my dog, actually.
Eleanor nodded toward Peanut.
The dachshund? He's been quite the hit with my second graders. Even got to play a role in today's story.
A role?
Mr. Bennett likes to incorporate the dogs into the readings. Your little guy played Sir Digsby, the brave knight in today's story. He even wore a paper crown.
The woman smiled, clearly charmed by the sight.
It's why the kids love coming here so much. Most educational field trips don't include canine theatrical performances.
Eleanor tried to reconcile this information with her mental image of Peanut, who once destroyed her case notes because she was 5 minutes late with his dinner.
That's surprising.
The perfect bookstore dog, so well behaved.
Before Eleanor could correct this wildly inaccurate assessment, Leo looked up and spotted her. A smile spread across his face, briefly interrupting his storytelling flow.
And then Little Bear realized he had a friend waiting on the far shore.
He shot a meaningful glance at Eleanor before returning to the book.
Someone who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself.
The story concluded minutes later to enthusiastic applause from the children. As the group dispersed, some drawn to explore the shelves while others gathered around the dogs, Leo made his way to Eleanor.
"You're early."
Interview ended sooner than expected.
"Good sign or bad sign?"
Inconclusive. But I see Peanut's found his calling in children's theater.
"He's a natural. The crown scene brought the house down."
Eleanor watched as Peanut allowed himself to be petted by several small hands, his usual wariness around strangers notably absent.
Who is this dog, and what have you done with Peanut?
Apollo's been mentoring him in the fine art of public adoration.
On cue, Apollo trotted over, nudging Leo's hand for attention.
"How was the interview? Besides inconclusive."
Fine. Professional. Exactly what you'd expect.
"That good, huh?"
Eleanor shot him a surprised look. Had her tone revealed more than her words?
What makes you think it wasn't good?
You just described one of life's potentially pivotal moments as fine, and exactly what you'd expect. Not exactly the language of enthusiasm.
Eleanor frowned, unaccustomed to having her carefully neutral descriptions parsed so accurately.
It was perfectly adequate. They asked reasonable questions. I gave competent answers.
Sounds absolutely thrilling. When do you start?
They'll decide by next week.
And if they offer?
I'll accept, of course.
Of course.
Something flickered in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or a question he was choosing not to ask. Before Eleanor could analyze it further, one of the children approached, tugging at Leo's sleeve.
Mr. Bennett, can we play the bookfinding game now? You promised.
Right you are, Emma. I did promise.
He turned back to Eleanor.
Duty calls. Feel free to stay and watch the chaos, or you can rescue Peanut from his newfound fame.
As Leo gathered the children for whatever the bookfinding game entailed, Eleanor found herself hovering uncertainly. She should collect Peanut and leave. She had follow-up emails to send, other applications to work on, a schedule to maintain. Instead, she found herself drifting toward a nearby armchair, settling into it as Leo began explaining the rules of the game to the excited children. Something about finding books with specific colors or animals on the cover, with Apollo serving as judge of their selections. Peanut, noticing her presence, trotted over and hopped into her lap, a behavior so uncharacteristic that Eleanor stiffened in surprise. The dachshund circled twice before settling against her, his warm weight oddly comforting.
Traitor.
She whispered, scratching behind his ears.
One day away and you've gone completely rogue.
Peanut sighed contentedly, apparently unbothered by this accusation. From her seat, Eleanor could observe without being directly involved, the perfect position from which to study the strange ecosystem of Cornerstone books. Leo moved through the space with a natural ease, helping children reach higher shelves, examining their selections with exaggerated seriousness, occasionally exchanging knowing glances with the teachers. He was different here than at the dog park, more animated, yet somehow more grounded, in his element. A flurry of commotion near the children's section drew her attention. One of the younger kids had accidentally knocked over a display of picture books, sending them cascading to the floor. The boy stood frozen, eyes wide with alarm.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Leo was there immediately, crouching beside the child.
Hey, it's okay. Books are pretty resilient. Want to help me put them back?
The relief on the boy's face was immediate as he nodded eagerly. Together, they began restacking the books, Leo turning the task into an impromptu sorting game.
Let's group them by color. What shade is this cover?
Blue, like the ocean.
Perfect description. Ocean blue goes in this pile.
Within minutes, the mess was transformed into a rainbow-ordered display that looked more deliberate than the original arrangement had been. The child beamed with pride at having helped create something beautiful from an accident. Watching this small interaction, Eleanor felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. Such a simple thing. A moment of chaos reframed as an opportunity rather than a disaster. No reprimand. No embarrassment. Just adaptation and forward movement. When was the last time she'd approached an unexpected setback with anything other than frustrated recalibration? When had she last seen an interruption to her plans as anything but a delay to be minimized?
Earth to Eleanor.
Leo's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood before her, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. The store had emptied while she was lost in contemplation. The children and teachers now gone, leaving a conspicuous quiet in their wake.
You looked very deep in thought, contemplating the mysteries of the universe.
Just observing.
And what did you observe?
You're good with them. The children.
They're easy to be good with. No pretense, no agendas, just curiosity and enthusiasm.
He settled into the chair opposite hers, running a hand through his already disheveled hair.
Story hour always leaves me both energized and exhausted. I never know which emotion is going to win out.
How often do you do this?
Every Tuesday and Thursday. Part of my community engagement approach to bookselling. Get them while they're young, before smartphones steal their souls.
Eleanor glanced around at the now quiet store, seeing it with new eyes, not just as a charming anachronism, but as a deliberate sanctuary. A place designed to foster the very qualities Leo had just described: curiosity and enthusiasm. The odd categorization system, the comfortable seating arranged to encourage lingering, the dogs as unexpected literary companions. All of it created an environment utterly unlike the sterile office where she'd spent her afternoon.
This place is special.
Was that a compliment from Eleanor Washington? I might need to mark this day on the calendar.
I give compliments.
To people who earn them through rigorous adherence to schedule and protocol, I imagine.
There was no edge to his teasing, only the same gentle humor she was beginning to recognize as his default approach to the world.
I'm not that rigid.
You typed up a 3-page instruction manual for your dog,
That's just being thorough.
with color-coded sections and a table of contents.
Eleanor felt heat rising to her cheeks, unable to deny this particular evidence of her perhaps excessive organizational tendencies.
Structure creates clarity.
While spontaneity creates possibility.
Their gazes held for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the fundamental difference in their approaches to life. Not a judgment, just an observation. Eleanor was the first to look away, suddenly aware of how long she'd lingered.
I should get going. We've imposed on your generosity enough for one day.
It wasn't an imposition. Apollo's going to be positively despondent without his new partner in crime.
As if on cue, both dogs appeared from whatever corner of the store they'd been exploring, Apollo nudging Peanut with his nose in what looked remarkably like encouragement.
What did he do?
What makes you think he did anything?
That guilty trot. I know that trot.
Leo's expression cracked into a grin.
He may have discovered a talent for retrieving items from bottom shelves. Specifically, a first edition Hemingway that I had no idea had fallen behind the classics section.
Oh, God.
Actually, I'm thinking of putting him on payroll. That book's been missing for months.
Eleanor gathered her things, including Peanut's surprisingly well-organized supplies, which Leo had apparently repacked with unexpected care. At the door, she paused.
Thank you. Again. For watching him. For not minding the chaos.
Anytime, I mean that.
Something in his expression shifted, becoming more serious.
Apollo's already adjusted his social calendar to include dachshund entertainment.
The responsible answer would be no. She'd already imposed once. She didn't have another interview scheduled. There was no practical reason to return.
Yes. If you're sure it's not a bother.
The opposite of a bother, whatever that is.
A convenience?
Exactly. Peanut is a complete convenience.
They both looked down at the dachshund, who chose that moment to shake vigorously, sending a small cloud of dog hair floating into the afternoon sunlight.
The very definition of the word.
As she stepped onto the sidewalk, Peanut trotting beside her with unusual compliance, Eleanor found herself already anticipating tomorrow's return to the bookstore. A deviation from her carefully structured job search. An unplanned variable in an equation she'd been trying desperately to solve. Perhaps, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, it was time to consider that some variables couldn't be eliminated, only incorporated into a new and more complex calculation.